I never expected that a broken boiler and a borrowed hoodie would fundamentally alter the course of my life, but that's exactly what happened. It's funny how the biggest changes are rarely announced with trumpets and fanfare. They sneak in through the side door, disguised as mundane inconveniences, and before you know it, your entire world has been rearranged. For me, it started with the quiet hum of my own solitude, a life I had carefully curated to be predictable and safe. My name is Miles. At the time, I was a 28-year-old graphic designer who worked from home, a fact that both enabled and deepened my penchant for quietude. My apartment was my sanctuary. Everything had its place. The stack of art books on the coffee table was perfectly aligned, the pens on my desk were sorted by color, and the silence was a comfortable blanket I wrapped myself in each day. I liked my routine. It was simple, controlled, and devoid of surprises. I thought that was what I wanted. The only unpredictable element in my life lived across the hall. His name was Caleb. He was the kind of man you noticed without trying. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a dusting of sawdust often clinging to his work jeans, he moved with an easy confidence that I could only ever dream of. He worked in construction, and I knew this because his heavy boots were the first thing I heard in the hallway every morning and the last thing I heard in the evening. He had a friendly, booming laugh that sometimes seeped through the walls, and a smile he offered freely to everyone in the building, myself included. From my vantage point, Caleb was a sun, and I was a planet in a distant, quiet orbit. I'd see him in the mailroom or taking out the trash, and we'd exchange pleasantries. "Hey man, how's it going?" he'd say, his voice warm and effortless. I'd mumble a "good, you," and scurry back to the safety of my apartment, my heart doing a strange little flutter. In my mind, he was a fixed point in a separate universe, the universe of confident, effortlessly charming, and presumably very straight men. He was pleasant to look at, a piece of living art I could appreciate from a safe distance, and that was all I ever expected him to be. My observations were my only form of interaction. I knew he drank his coffee black because I'd seen him at the corner cafe. I knew he was close with his family because I'd heard him on the phone, his voice softening as he talked to his mom. These were tiny, stolen fragments of a life I was not a part of, puzzle pieces I collected without ever expecting to see the full picture. He was a story I was reading from across the hallway, a character whose next chapter one would never get to influence. Or so I believed. Life, as it turns out, has a funny way of making you a co-author when you least expect it. The change came during a brutal cold snap in late November. The wind howled outside my window, rattling the glass, and the city was layered in a coat of icy frost. I was cocooned inside, thankful for my radiator's steady, clanking heat, a cup of tea warming my hands as I worked on a new logo design. My world was warm, quiet, and contained. And then there was a knock on my door. It was a firm, slightly frantic sound that was entirely out of place in my predictable evening. I opened the door to find Caleb standing there, looking utterly miserable. He was shivering, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of a thin jacket that was clearly no match for the bitter cold. His usual warm confidence was gone, replaced by a look of frustrated desperation. His cheeks were red from the chill, and I could see his breath misting in the air of the hallway, which felt only marginally warmer than the outdoors. "Hey, Miles, sorry to bother you," he started, his teeth chattering slightly. "This is going to sound crazy, but my boiler is completely shot. It's like an icebox in my apartment. The landlord said the repair guy can't come until tomorrow morning at the earliest." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of pure exasperation. "I was wondering, and please feel free to say no, but would it be okay if I crashed on your couch tonight? I'll be out of your hair first thing in the morning." I can't. I honestly can't stay in there. My mind went completely blank for a second. My safe, controlled world was being invaded. All my internal alarms were blaring, telling me to make an excuse, to protect my solitude. But looking at him, genuinely shivering and looking so defeated, another instinct took over. It was the simple, human instinct to help someone who was cold. "Oh wow. Yeah, of course," I heard myself say, the words tumbling out before my anxiety could stop them. "Don't be silly. Come in, get warm." He looked so relieved it was almost painful to see. "Are you sure? I really don't want to impose. It's not an imposition. It's freezing," I insisted, stepping back to let him in. The moment he stepped over my threshold, the difference in temperature was stark. He He let out a deep sigh of relief as the warmth of my apartment enveloped him. He was still shivering, a deep-seated chill that wouldn't be shaken off so easily. He was wearing just a t-shirt under his thin jacket. On instinct, I went to my closet. I pulled out my favorite hoodie. It was a simple gray one, worn soft over the years, with a fleece lining that felt like a hug. It probably smelled like my laundry detergent, a scent that was intrinsically mine. I held it out to him. "Here," I said. "Put this on." He looked at the hoodie, then at me, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Gratitude, maybe? "Miles, you don't have to do that. Just take it, Caleb," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "You're going to get sick." He hesitated for another moment, then slowly took it from my hands, his cold fingers brushing against mine. The contact was brief, accidental, but it sent a jolt straight through me. He pulled the hoodie over his head, and I watched as my old, familiar sweatshirt settled over his broad frame. It was a little snug on his shoulders, but he immediately looked more comfortable, burrowing his hands into the front pocket. "Thanks," he said, his voice muffled by the fabric. "Seriously, thank you." And just like that, the barrier between our two separate worlds had dissolved. He was here, in my space, wearing my clothes. And my carefully constructed routine was about to be completely and utterly dismantled. That first night was a study in polite awkwardness. I set him up with pillows and a comforter on my sofa, which suddenly looked very small with him occupying it. We existed in a strange state of forced domesticity, two near strangers navigating a shared space. I felt hyper-aware of everything. The sound of his breathing, the way he moved around my living room, the sheer physical presence of him filling a space that was usually just for me. "Can I order us a pizza or something?" he asked, pulling his wallet out of his jeans. "It's the least I can do for saving me from turning into a human popsicle." I was about to protest, to say it wasn't necessary, but I saw the genuine desire to contribute in his eyes. It wasn't just charity. It was his way of balancing the scales, of making this less of an imposition. "Okay," I agreed. "Pizza sounds good." We ate sitting on the floor, using the coffee table as our dining table. The initial stiffness began to melt away, lubricated by cheese and pepperoni. I found myself relaxing, bit by bit. The Caleb I was having dinner with wasn't the larger-than-life figure from the hallway. He was just a guy who, as it turned out, was surprisingly easy to talk to. I learned more about him in those 2 hours than I had in a year of hallway pleasantries. He told me about his job, the physical toll it took, but also the satisfaction he got from building something tangible with his own hands. He talked about his younger sister, who was in college studying to be a veterinarian, and his face lit up with a fierce pride that was incredibly endearing. He asked me about my work, and when I showed him some of my designs on my laptop, he didn't just give a polite nod. He really looked, asking thoughtful questions about fonts and color theory. "So you basically make things look cool for a living?" he asked, leaning closer to peer at the screen. I laughed, a real, unforced laugh. "That's one way to put it, yeah? I try to make things clear and beautiful." He pointed to a logo I was particularly proud of, one with a complex, elegant line drawing. "How do you even start to come up with something like that? My brain doesn't work that way. I see wood and nails. You see this." It was in that moment that my initial perception of him began to crumble. He wasn't just the handsome, sporty guy from across the hall. There was a depth to him, a curiosity and an appreciation for things outside of his own experience that I hadn't expected. He wasn't just looking at my work. He was trying to understand it. He was trying to understand me. Later, as we were cleaning up, our hands brushed as we both reached for the same pizza box. It was another one of those tiny, insignificant accidents that felt like a tectonic shift inside my chest. He pulled his hand back quickly, a faint blush rising on his neck. "Sorry," he mumbled, looking at the floor. "No, it's fine," I said, my own voice a little too high. The air crackled with a new kind of awareness, a subtle tension that hadn't been there before. We watched a movie after that, a mindless action flick I picked at random. But I wasn't paying attention to the explosions on screen. I was acutely aware of Caleb sitting on my couch, wrapped in my blanket, wearing my hoodie. I could smell the faint scent of my laundry detergent mixed with his own unique scent, something clean and warm. It was an impossibly intimate combination. I was watching him watch the movie, the way the blue light from the television flickered across his face, highlighting the strong line of his jaw, and the relaxed set of his mouth. A quiet, dangerous hope began to bloom in my chest, a hope I tried my best to crush before it could take root. This was temporary. It was just a broken boiler. Tomorrow, he would go back to his apartment, and I would go back to mine, and the silence would return. But I had a terrifying feeling that the silence wouldn't feel as comfortable as it used to. The next day, the repairman didn't show. A miscommunication, the landlord explained over the phone, full of apologies. It would be another day. Caleb looked genuinely apologetic when he told me, as if he were personally responsible for the city's overburdened HVAC technicians. I can find a hotel, he offered, already reaching for his phone. This is getting ridiculous. Don't be stupid, I said, the words coming out more firmly than I expected. It's fine. Honestly, it's nice to have the company. The admission hung in the air between us, honest and vulnerable. A small smile touched his lips. Yeah, he said quietly. It is. That second day felt different. The initial awkwardness was gone, replaced by a comfortable, lived-in rhythm. We made coffee in the morning, navigating my small kitchen in a quiet, synchronized dance. He went to work, and I stayed home, but the silence in my apartment felt different. It wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with the anticipation of his return. When he came back that evening, his boots thudding in the hallway, it felt less like a neighbor returning and more like someone coming home. He insisted on cooking dinner that night to thank me. I watched, fascinated, as he took over my kitchen. He moved with the same confidence he did on a construction site, chopping vegetables with a surprising precision and seasoning a pair of chicken breasts from memory. He was completely in his element, humming along to the radio I never turned on. The apartment filled with the smell of garlic and rosemary, smells of a life I didn't normally live. He told me he'd had a rough day. A new apprentice on his crew had made a costly mistake, and Caleb had spent most of the afternoon fixing it, falling behind schedule. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than usual. There was a vulnerability in his posture as he leaned against my counter, waiting for the chicken to cook. The confident armor he usually wore had cracks in it, and through them, I saw someone who got tired, who got stressed, who carried burdens just like everyone else. After dinner, we collapsed onto the couch. We put on another movie, but neither of us was really watching. The long day had caught up to him. I saw his eyelids start to droop, his head nodding forward before he'd catch himself. I was sitting on one end of the sofa, and he was on the other, a respectable distance between us. After a few minutes of fighting it, he shifted. He leaned his head back against the sofa cushions, his eyes closed. A few more minutes passed in silence, punctuated only by the movie's soundtrack. Then, slowly, as if in a dream, his head tilted to the side, coming to rest gently on my shoulder. My entire body went rigid. I stopped breathing. I could feel the surprising weight of his head, the soft texture of his hair against my neck. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the quiet room. I was terrified to move, to even breathe, for fear of breaking the spell. He let out a soft, sleepy sigh, nuzzling just slightly closer, and I felt a wave of warmth spread through my entire body that had nothing to do with the radiator. He was trusting me. In his exhaustion, in his sleep, his body had gravitated towards mine for comfort, for stability. It was the most intimate thing I had ever experienced, more intimate than any touch I'd ever known. There was no pretense, no agenda. It was pure, unconscious instinct. I don't know how long we sat like that. It could have been 10 minutes or an hour. Time seemed to warp and stretch. Slowly, his sleeping form slumped further, until he was half sprawled across the cushions, his head now resting squarely in my lap. His breathing was deep and even, the picture of peaceful exhaustion. I looked down at him, at the way his brow was unfurrowed in sleep, at the trusting line of his mouth. And in that moment, sitting in the soft glow of the television, with the weight of Caleb's head in my lap, I knew I was in serious trouble. The small, hopeful flower in my chest had bloomed into a full-blown garden, and there was no crushing it now. I let him sleep. I didn't have the heart to wake him, to move him. My own body was screaming with a mixture of terror and elation. Every nerve ending was on high alert. I could feel the warmth of him seeping through my jeans, a grounding, solid presence. I gently, tentatively, rested my hand on his back, feeling the slow, steady rise and fall of his breathing beneath my palm. It felt like I was holding something impossibly precious. He stirred about an hour later. He shifted, and his eyes fluttered open, blinking in the dim light of the room. It took him a moment to register where he was. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with confusion, and then he looked down at his head in my lap. A deep, mortified blush crept up his neck and flooded his face. He scrambled upright so fast, he almost fell off the couch. "Oh my God," he whispered, his voice hoarse with sleep and embarrassment. "Miles, I am so sorry. I didn't mean to. I was just so tired." He wouldn't look at me, running a hand over his face as if trying to wipe the last few hours away. "Hey," I said, my voice softer than I'd intended. "It's okay. You were exhausted. Don't worry about it." But it wasn't okay. Not really. The comfortable, easy space between us had suddenly become charged with 1,000 unspoken questions. The spell was broken, and the air was thick with the fallout. I should go to bed," he stammered, getting up and practically fleeing to the air mattress in the corner. "Right. Yeah. Good night." He didn't look back. I sat there on the couch, the space where he'd been now feeling cold and empty. The warmth lingered on my jeans, a phantom sensation that made my heart ache. The next morning was a disaster of unspoken tension. We moved around each other in the kitchen like two negatively charged magnets, repelling each other at every turn. The easy chatter of the day before was gone, replaced by a strained, suffocating silence. We managed a clipped morning, and that was it. He practically inhaled his coffee and was out the door before I could even think of something to say to bridge the chasm that had opened between us. I spent the entire day in a state of agonizing internal analysis. I replayed the moment on the couch again and again in my mind, examining it from every possible angle. It was like I was a detective at a crime scene, dusting for prints, looking for clues that would tell me what it all meant. Was it just a simple act of a tired man seeking a moment of rest? Was I projecting all of my own longing onto an innocent gesture? My rational brain, the part of me that had built a life on predictability and caution, told me to let it go. It meant nothing. He was tired. He was straight. I was his temporary landlord, his neighbor, nothing more. To think otherwise was to set myself up for a world of hurt. It was a fantasy, a dangerous one, and I needed to shut it down before it completely consumed me. But my heart, that traitorous, hopeful part of me, had a different theory. It clung to the memory of the weight of his head in my lap, the feeling of his breathing under my hand. It argued that no one, not even someone completely exhausted, falls asleep on a near stranger like that unless there's some level of underlying comfort, some unspoken pull. It whispered that the blush on his face wasn't just embarrassment, it was something more. It was the panic of someone whose mask had slipped, whose unconscious actions had revealed a truth they weren't ready to face. Hope and fear waged a brutal war inside me. I wanted so desperately to believe the hopeful narrative, but the fear of rejection, of making a fool of myself, was a powerful defense. I had spent years building walls around my heart to avoid this very feeling, this gut-wrenching uncertainty, this vulnerability. It was easier to assume I had imagined it all, to retreat back into my safe, quiet world. It was safer to be lonely than to be heartbroken. By the time I heard his boots in the hallway that evening, I had managed to convince myself, almost, that it had all been a product of my overactive imagination. When Caleb walked in, he didn't meet my eyes. He went straight to his bag in the corner. "Good news," he said, his back still to me. His voice was flat, devoid of its usual warmth. "The boiler's fixed. They finished up this afternoon." My heart sank. This was it. The end of the strange, temporary dream we'd been living. He was leaving. "Oh," I said, my own voice small. That's great." It felt like a lie. It felt like the worst possible news. He started gathering his few things, his toothbrush, the charger for his phone. I just stood there, watching him, feeling a profound sense of loss. The little bubble of domesticity we'd created was about to pop, and I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready for the silence to return. He finished packing his small bag and zipped it up. Then he straightened up and peeled off the gray hoodie. My hoodie. He held it in his hands for a moment, looking down at it, his expression unreadable. He folded it neatly, a gesture so careful it made my throat tighten, and walked over to me. He stopped right in front of me, so close I could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. He was finally looking at me, and his gaze was intense, searching. The air between us was electric, humming with everything that had gone unsaid for the past 24 hours. I need to give this back, he said, his voice low and a little shaky. He held the folded hoodie out to me. My hand trembled slightly as I reached out to take it. But just as my fingers were about to touch the soft fabric, he pulled it back slightly, holding on to it. My hand was left hovering in the empty space between us. But the thing is, Miles, he continued, his eyes locked on mine, I don't think I wanted my breath caught in my throat. My heart stopped its frantic beating and just paused, waiting. I don't think I want to go back to my apartment, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I mean, I do. But not if it means this ends. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I could only look at him, my mind reeling. The boiler, he said, a small, self-deprecating smile touching his lips. It wasn't that bad. Not really. I mean, it was broken, but I could have stayed. I've wanted to talk to you for months. Properly talk to you. And I'm a coward. This was my excuse. The confession hung in the air, a stunning, beautiful revelation that shattered all my carefully constructed fears. He wasn't just being polite. He wasn't just being friendly. It was real. All of it. Caleb. I breathed, the name feeling like a prayer on my lips. He dropped the hoodie onto the floor beside us, forgotten. He raised his hands and gently cupped my face, his thumbs stroking my cheeks. His touch was hesitant, questioning, as if he was asking for permission. Is this okay? He whispered, his gaze dropping to my mouth. I couldn't find my voice, so I just nodded, a small, jerky movement. That was all the confirmation he needed. He leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away, and then his lips met mine. The first kiss was soft, tentative, and searching. It was a question asked in the gentlest way possible. It was shy and full of all the uncertainty and hope we had both been feeling. I responded instinctively, my hands coming up to rest on his waist, pulling him just a fraction closer. I kissed him back, pouring all of my pent-up longing, my fear, and my incredible, overwhelming relief into the gesture. He pulled back an inch, his forehead resting against mine. His eyes were closed, but he was smiling, a real, radiant smile this time. Okay, he breathed out, as if confirming something to himself. Okay, and then he kissed me again. This time, there was no hesitation. It was a kiss that was confident and sure, deep and hungry. It was a kiss that tasted of resolution and the promise of a new beginning. He hadn't just returned my hoodie. He had returned my hope, and in its place, he'd given me something infinitely better. The weeks that followed felt like waking up from a long, gray dream into a world of vibrant color. The unspoken tension was replaced by an easy, joyful intimacy. We didn't have to navigate awkward silences anymore. Instead, we filled the space with laughter, with conversation, with the comfortable silence of two people who were simply happy to be in the same room. The hallway between our apartments became less of a barrier and more of a bridge. We went on our first official date a few days after that kiss. He took me to a small Italian restaurant tucked away on a side street, a place with checkered tablecloths and candlelight. It felt both thrillingly new and completely natural. We held hands across the table, and it didn't feel strange or forced. It felt like my hand had finally found the place it was always meant to be. He told me more about his secret hope to one day open his own custom furniture business, to build beautiful things that lasted. I told him about my own dreams, fears, and the quiet life I had built, a life that suddenly felt too small for the happiness that was flooding into it. He didn't move his things back into his apartment right away. We existed in a happy limbo between our two homes. Sometimes we'd sleep at his place, sometimes at mine. My apartment, once a fortress of solitude, now felt warmer, more alive. It was often filled with the smell of his cooking or the sound of his laughter as he watched me try to explain the plot of a pretentious foreign film I loved. My gray hoodie became a shared object, a symbol of how our lives had become interwoven. Sometimes I'd find it on his chair, sometimes he'd find it on mine. It didn't belong to me anymore. It belonged to us. A few months later, we were on my couch, in the exact same spot where our story had taken its terrifying, wonderful turn. It was a lazy Sunday afternoon, and the light was streaming through the window. I was leaning against him, my head on his chest, his arms wrapped securely around me. He was wearing the hoodie, of course. His chin was resting on the top of my head, and I could feel the gentle rumble in his chest as he hummed a quiet tune. You know, I said softly, tracing a pattern on his stomach. I was so scared that night, he tightened his arms around me. Which part? He asked, his voice a low murmur against my hair. When you fell asleep on me, I admitted. I was terrified. I thought I was imagining everything. I was so sure I was about to get my heart broken. He was quiet for a moment. Then he tilted my chin up so he could look at me. His eyes were soft and full of an affection that still made my breath catch. I was terrified too, he confessed. When I woke up and realized what I'd done, I thought I'd blown it. I thought I'd scared you off for good. I spent that whole next day at work planning my apology, and then planning how I was going to finally just tell you the truth. He leaned down and kissed me, a soft, reassuring kiss that spoke of comfort and home. I'm glad the boiler broke, he said against my lips. I'm glad you had a stupidly comfortable couch, I replied with a smile. It was perfect. This feeling of safety, of being completely known and completely accepted, was something I never thought I would find. It's funny to think back on it now. My life was so ordered, so meticulously planned. I thought I had everything under control, that I was protecting myself from the messiness of human connection. But I wasn't protecting myself. I was just limiting myself. I was living in a room with the shades drawn, and I didn't even realize it until Caleb walked in and threw open the curtains. Sometimes, the best things in life are the ones you never planned for. Sometimes, a simple act of kindness, an unexpected inconvenience, is actually the universe giving you a key to a door you never even knew was there. And sometimes, all it takes is a broken heater to finally find the kind of warmth you've been looking for your entire life.